I hear the topic of the day is prospecting. Not just prospecting, but end of year prospecting. That requires a pitcher of water. And um, Greg, did you want to launch and say what this is all about? And
Sure. This is I've been roped in at the last minute. Unfortunately, and just to let you all know, unfortunately, our usual leader, Marianne Pelletier, is out ill today. She contracted COVID this week, so she is resting right now. Hopefully, we'll be feeling better soon. So that leaves it to me to introduce our guest speaker, Jen Filla of Aspire Research Group. If you ask me to on the spot come up with a couple sentences about Jen, which essentially I've been asked to do right now because Jen is an expert in prospect research and many other aspects of fundraising knowledge. Jen has spoken at many conferences. You may have seen her at many APRA conferences. She's a wonderful resource and a wonderful person to talk to. So, without further ado, I introduce Jen Filla and just have her step up on the microphone.
Thanks so much, Greg. I appreciate that. Kind words, kind words. And we have just this wonderful group of skills between the three of us here today. So we have Ruthie Giles, prospect management expert. We've got Gregory Duke with all things technical data analysis, right?
And Excel.
Excel for sure.
Lots of Excel.
Lots of Excel. Okay. And I am focused on prospect research. So a little bit prospect research in the sense of how I grew up in it, which is a little bit of everything, but not too much of one thing, which has always been, keeps me busy and interested. So the topic today was prospect ID, especially at year end, and we're approaching that June 30 fiscal year end for so many folks. And when Marianne asked me, typically when Marianne and I present together, we do a little back and forth. And we didn't really coordinate that this time, which I guess is a good thing because she's not here. So I was thinking ahead, what would I like to do or how would I like to share with everyone? And my favorite thing is to hear from you. And there's too many folks to really just open everything up. This is a large group and we're not going to be able to do small groups. So we can't have you talking to each other. So I want to do kind of a combination of things, which is why I say get your fingers ready to type so that you can share some stories in the chat. It would be wonderful to have an active chat. And I have some questions for you. I have a story or two to share. And then I think we can get a little more interactive because if you're showing up, you're caring about the topic, you probably, at least some of you are going to have some questions and some of you are going to have some triumphs that you would want to share too. So I'm not going to do the small group chat. I think what I'll do is I'll share with you first a story I have about working in an organization where there was a gap at year end. Then I'm going to talk about some of the things I do to help clients who have trouble at year end, except that I have to say most of my clients are just so perfect. You know, that's the thing about consulting, right, guys? You can just pick your clients and you get the perfect ones and it's all good. So no problems at year end. So when I was working as a researcher, I was also foundation and grants manager. That was in my title, which is that titles are funny things. And we had the whole strategy meeting with the team. It was a small nonprofit fundraising team for an national organization. And we were, lining up the strategic objectives and setting goals for the year. And there was one for foundations. And I was so excited because I was young and I was going to have to fulfill a goal that was part of the strategic planning. It was great. And so, I went back to my desk afterwards and I was like, okay, how can I interact with the program staff and find out what the needs are and raise these funds? And then I took this to my supervisor and she said, oh, you don't have to do any of that. No, that's not part of your goal. I was like, oh, okay. So I didn't do anything. And then guess what? As we approached year end, there was this gap. And you won't ever believe what the number was. It was the exact number that was supposed to be raised in the foundation area that, of course, no one had done anything for because there was no name assigned to that goal, which I took as a lesson that, like, assigning names to things is really important. And so when we do prospecting, especially like campaign prospecting or any kind of screening segmentation, I'm all about, when we name our segments, we put a segment name next to each donor name so that the end client doesn't wonder and scratch their head because they don't have you folks in their offices to figure it out. Like, well, which one was that? She said we had 40 people who could do this. Well, which 40 people are there? So that was my only experience with not meeting end of year goal, or coming close to not meeting with end of year goal. Usually, the work that we get is a scramble at calendar year end. And that's when folks have been slow to ask. And so the year is starting to close and they begin to panic about asking for a gift and how much should they ask and what kind of ask. And so some years we have more of this than others, but we do a lot of profiling, really quick, like, okay, I got to go ask this person. And sometimes it's profile updates because we did the work for them and they hadn't cultivated the way in which they intended. And then the other times we had one real success story with an arts organization. And this was coming out of COVID. And so they had reduced our hours, reduced the work that they did with us. But it was coming to their year end and they needed to raise more money on lean staff. And I think they had all taken pay cuts. And so what we did for them was they had identified who they were going to be asking. So they already had their list. And we did a quick check. And this was the staff, but also the board of directors were doing asks. And we went through the list very fast and we identified what would give them confidence to ask for more and specified how much more. So if they were asking for $1,000 and we saw that this donor routinely gave $5,000 to other arts organizations, we recommended ask for $5,000 and here's why. And that was really successful for them. So this culturally, their board wasn't accustomed to asking for larger gifts anyway, but giving them the confidence with the data was what really made the difference for them. So they ended up it was the first time in the organization's history where the fundraised income was more than the earned income. So that was a pretty exciting moment for them. They had been building up major gifts. The organization had been behind that, but they didn't anticipate COVID. And to come out so strong, they were so excited. So that's my success story. And what happens on my end for helping people at year end. We don't often get a scramble, at least in my major gifts world, because we fill their pipelines. So typically there's, forecasting being done. So they should know what's coming in. Often it's the campaign that has the problem at the end that we help with, and we do more searching. I'm curious if you could put in the chat, what is the pain that brought you to this water cooler chat? Like, talk to me. What happens at year end in your world that you're like, ooh, we got to hear from Jen, Greg, and Ruthie today because we got to fix this. And I have some ideas. I mean, for me, I said, oh, we got to chat. Oh, yes. Thank you for putting that in. For me, that's I tend to think of list building, like how can we better help someone focus on a portfolio that's perhaps too large. We have a client we're working with now that's the key to getting them to perform better. Or list building for different like specific initiatives. For me, it's just not usually year end. So I'm kind of curious what you have going on that Mary Ann was going to be here and say, yeah, John, what about this? You just like the title of this water cooler chat and you're interested in hearing what others do. We could talk about list building for sure. I'd rather talk about what you want to hear. And let me just say this, Ruthie and Greg, if you could pay attention to the participants and participants out there, if you want to speak, like raise your hand. And to find that, you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on reactions, and you can raise your hand, and it's a toggle thing, so you can toggle it on or off. And then just interrupt me, guys, and we can let people talk. We do have some more chat happening. Thank you. I have some gift officers
Whoa.
who have a gap to goal, and I'm trying to figure out ways to help them close that. So I'm hearing some list building. Even though we have switched to quarterly goals to avoid the year-end rush, it still happens. I do think a lot of it is due to overestimating gift amounts. We're working on it. Personally, I'm always on the lookout for new prospecting ideas in healthcare. We are on track more or less, but not as many people are responding to our appeals as in the past. Boy, you guys are really answering. Annual Giving wants to know how to focus in on top prospects since the annual giving pool is so huge. They want to help segmenting their 50,000 plus annual giving pool. Whew. For me, it is list building, and do I use the same or older lists and try different criteria, or see if the new wealth screening has made any changes? I have been away from actually doing prospect research and am now at an institution building a brand new prospect management program, needing to build a pipeline and find prospects. I'm wondering if there have been prospects we overlooked. So let's, there's a lot of answers. You guys are awesome. Higher level fundraisers exhibiting a high degree of mushiness about early cultivation because it's work. They seem to focus on solicitation and proposal submitted stages because it's exciting. We had my granddaughter, she's 7, and she wants it exciting all the time. She's going to be a great major gift officer. Just every moment should be exciting all the time. And she's the star of the show. We had a senior leadership change last fall, and our new CPO style is markedly different. Yikes. Multiple assignments to a prospect largely ignores PR and too much reliance on annual event. They're all goals, but only a departmental one. Working on those who have made gifts of a particular range over the last few years. So it does sound like overarching all these things, hop in, Greg and Ruthie, is how can we better identify prospects that are in our existing donor pool and in our existing pipelines if it's annual giving. Does that sound like what you heard throughout?
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is reaching donors at the times that they want to give. And whenever I hear about end of year prospecting and reading everyone's chat, I think about the old Irish story about the tourist couple who shows up at a petrol station. They're lost, and they ask the proprietor, "Well, how do I get to such and such town?" And the proprietor says, "Well, I wouldn't have started from here." End of year prospecting is a little bit like that, just because it's very close. We're less than 2 months from the June 30th fiscal year end for a lot of places. That's not a lot of time to do cultivation. So in situations like this, when I was working at universities, one of the things I would look at are the people who gave in May or June in the past. And maybe this is a time they feel comfortable in giving. So, and obviously this is, this ties back to database review and technical strata, but just looking at, who among our prospect pools made gifts in the past in May and June, especially if those were large gifts, because it's possible that in the past we were in this situation before. We asked these people for a May or June gift, and this was the time when they felt comfortable making such a gift. or they are comfortable with receiving a last minute request. So, as I loved the comment that people were being mushy on mushiness about early cultivation. Sarah, no, that was perfect. Mushy about early cultivation. Well, this is actually one of the few cases where it might not be too bad to be mushy on early cultivation, because if this is a last minute, get out the last gift so we could reach goal, we need development officers who are bold enough, or just as your 7-year-old Jen says, just only interested in the exciting parts of cultivation, to get out there and make those stretch asks. If you have someone on your team who's good at making those last minute stretch asks, ask that person, what are the things you're looking for when you talk to a donor to suggest they might make a last minute ask, a last minute gift.
Yeah, I love it. So if I'm looking for someone to give at this time of year a larger gift, why not look at who did it before? Which, once you say it, sounds so obvious, but clearly isn't. So I think it's one of the things I love about data analysis, because we learned some things that were like, oh yeah, duh, of course we should do that. And maybe also those folks who I'm really interested in. So because I don't do data analysis, because my clients typically don't have enough data really for that to be meaningful, and they're not ready, I'm looking for key indicators of engagement or readiness that are already collected in a typical file. And I call it milestone giving and also time. So when we see people hit milestones, and it has to be meaningful for the particular organization, but you can usually see it in the data, right? Like you can eyeball where those breaks are, like in lifetime giving or in years of giving or count of giving, depending on what's available. So I kind of like that. Like when you see someone hitting a big milestone that has the right capacity score or whatever, reaching out, that seems like a great prospect to me, because we're seeing that kind of engagement over the long term, and they have the ability. And if we have someone who loves asking for that, wants the big win, it probably wouldn't take much to push them over. So it's the milestone and also the timing, because as you mentioned, Greg, like there are plenty of people who give at the same time, and it's their life schedule, not ours, that they give to. Do you have any thoughts, Ruthie? I'm putting you on the spot, but.
That's okay. I agree with Greg, like looking at the data to see if there's a pattern in their giving is helpful. Other things I've seen other organizations do, when I worked in like a private secondary ed, they would often look to the parents of seniors and see if they might make sort of a capstone gift, marking the end of their child's time at the school, assuming the child had a good run there, of course. And mixed success with that, because sometimes they weren't cultivating the parents for the 3 years prior to that. If they had been cultivating the parents for the 3 years prior, of course, that worked out much better. But sometimes it was just a shot in the dark and a Hail Mary pass, and you got to put in the work to get the gift, of course. And the other thing I've seen in the spring is just they'll look at the lists of who typically gives within a year, not even necessarily May or June, and who hasn't yet given so far this year. And one gift officer I knew was really good at this, and I credit it to his voice and the fact that it was done a long time ago. He would get on the phone, and he had one of those like smooth jazz radio DJ voices, just real, like it would just like lull you into a yes. And he literally just went straight down his list. Anyone who had made a gift just over 365 days or so, like he'd figure out, like
do you have a spare
he'd figure it out.
that's handy, or is it
And
hooked up to
someone-
your stuff?
I've got one that's plugged in. I looked it in there, so I didn't. Yeah.
So I don't have control over that.
Okay, whoops. Someone hit the button.
So
But yeah,
smooth
but so
jazz
he would,
voice went down his list.
And he would get gifts, and he was also the newest gift officer, and the newest gift officer got the list of the most challenging people because they'd all have cannibalized what had been left behind from the gift officer who was outgoing. So he had the most challenging list, and he had that great voice, and he just went down the list and he got gifts out of people no one else could, because he just called them up, talked with them, and he had this great voice. I mean, I swear that's part of it. So
Sure,
but
I believe it.
yeah. But he also followed up with an email and a handwritten note. Like, he did all the methods. This was before Facebook and LinkedIn were really a thing. So social media wasn't so much a thing, but yeah, he emailed, he called, he wrote a little note, and then he just lather, rinse, repeat, did it all again. And he was successful.
So that really speaks to some of what we heard in the chat about the annual giving. So those are tactics that really work with that group. Like, let's look at who's just about ready to give, because if we ask them, we could probably get them to give more than they might have otherwise, especially at certain giving levels. That's great. Or someone who's made, if you're looking at count of gifts, someone who was increasing the count of gifts or decreasing the count of gifts, however you want to look at it, is another great way to prioritize. So if we're thinking about prioritization, I mean, there's lots of ways to source those gifts. Just a spoiler alert, because it's not going to come out till July, I think, but I interviewed Brock Sylvie at Northwestern University on my podcast, Chat Bites, about the zombie proposals, because how could I not talk to someone who has the phrase zombie proposals at work, right? He didn't come up with it, but he was part of the team, and they were featured in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And I wonder if this isn't another great example of when to tackle the zombie proposals. So a zombie proposal is one that hasn't closed, and hasn't for a long time. And one of the things that's needed, or at least from the data analysis they did, was communication. So sometimes it's a matter of, if you're looking at least 3 months, 2 months out to your goal, and you're trying to figure out who you should focus on, maybe focusing on the zombie proposals that haven't closed because you haven't been communicating enough with them. Now's the time, because you could possibly get that gift in before the end of that fiscal year. Zombie proposals. We can't bury them. We have to keep working them. We have to talk to them. Does anyone want to unmute or raise their hand about and share what you have done that works well? While I read the note in the chat, piggybacking on Ruthie's note, we have a gift officer who is very successful by thanking donors. It often turns into a renewal or even an additional gift within the same year. Nice. I learned something today from a client I've been working with, and I really like the appreciative inquiry approach and the look at what is the strengths that are lending themselves to reaching our destination. And when they were sharing their stories about closing on gifts with donors, it became clear that there's really two kinds of cultivation that they're doing with their donors, and that both are really important. And some can happen really fast, because we did have our mid-level guy in the group as well. And it's the human cultivation. I'm going to talk to you, Ruthie, because I know you and I like you as a human being. And I might even become friends with you because we're just, clicking, you're just too cool. And you're also a donor. And so we have these human conversations, but then we also talk about the organization and your interest in it, and answer your questions and give you more information about what you want to hear. I thought that was interesting. It was the first time I haven't heard of that in prospect management as tracking. So maybe adding some human touches before fiscal year end would be a nice way of bringing people in. Do we have anyone raise their hand? I'm not seeing. I know it's pretty daring to be recorded. Any thoughts on building leadership annual gift lists for end of year? Leadership annual gift. Oh, yeah, prioritization. Again, really, but on that annual giving level. So when you have a lot of data and you're looking for key points, I guess, is velocity a key thing for annual giving? Would we look at people who have been shaking and grooving in their giving summary history?
Well, ironically, I mean, and this is something I kind of wish Marianne had been around for so I could argue with her about. I have heard for years that velocity is important, that if people are giving more year on year, that's important. And I can see that. But I would also say, look for the people who are giving exactly the same amount every year, because that's always, to me, an indication that they like your organization. They give at the same time every year, the same amount, but no one's come to them and asked them to say, hey, you're giving $1,000 every year. If you consider giving $2,000 this year, or maybe $3,000. When I was working at my second place here in the United States, I saw a guy who had given every year for the past, I believe it was 42 years. He'd never given more than $1,000, and he made his first $1,000 gift back in like the 80s. And I just thought to myself, wow, $1,000 in 1980 is probably around like 3,000 or 4,000 now. So I went to his prospect, officer, and I said, hey, why don't you consider asking this guy for, a couple thousand? Sure enough, 5 years later, he was giving like 10,000 a year instead of 1,000. So, I mean, velocity is important, yes, but also consider the people who could potentially have high velocity, but for some reason just don't. So
That's pretty cool. So there are many ways to slice and dice, and one way doesn't get everybody. So maybe it's having your favorites or testing out these different ways of prioritizing, and then find out what's really working at your organization. So you have to follow through once you deliver. One of the things we do when we're prospecting at Aspire, especially prospecting externally, like we have a client in Bulgaria, and they're running some events here in the US, they have a foundation, and we always try to document our strategy, our sourcing strategy, because if one is really working, then great, let's do more of that. If one bombs or we have overlapping, and I think it's the same with any kind of data. If you're tracking what you're doing, you're going to be able to do more or change and tweak to make it better. We have some more comments. Leadership annual giving. Look at people assigned to MGOs and see who is sort of dead weight, who they don't have time to reach out and reassign to LGOs. What's an LGO? LGO.
leadership gift officers.
Leadership. Thank you. I was totally lost on that one. Leadership giving officer. Okay. Interesting. And that was in response to filling pipelines, right? Backfilling pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
Great idea. If you use target analytics, you can also pull rising stars or people that have continued to make larger donations over the last 3 years. I believe that's the TA definition. Good point. I'm thinking of one in particular that would work well. Oh, becoming planned giving folks. Yeah, I was thinking of that too. Mm-hmm. Like the person who gave $1,000 since 1980s.
And I would just add one thing to that. Yes, the people who give on a very consistent basis are good planned giving folks. But think about this. If I'm asking someone for a planned gift, would I rather ask someone who has given $1,000 every year or $10,000 every year? Because if I go to someone with $1 million planned gift ask, that person who's used to giving 5-figure, maybe 6-figure gifts, I think would be better prepared, even if they both have the money, even if they both had the capacity to give $1 million as a planned gift. I think someone who has the history of giving at a higher level would be better prepared to receive that ask. So do think about that. Also, you kind of don't want to leave money on the table too, all the time we're waiting to make this planned gift ask. It'd be great to be getting $10,000 a year instead of $1,000 a year. So
I think Russell James, planned giving guru, would agree with you. If apparently that some of his research has demonstrated that if you have someone who's made a planned gift, when you're cultivating them for that he finds that the annual giving also rises. So it isn't one or the other. It's clearly they love you or they don't love you. And if they love you, they will give what they can, which is amazing. And when you talk to the gift officers and you hear these stories, it's just a beautiful thing. That really comes through. I get so excited about that. I love interviewing gift officers. I try to make it a point that that's part of what I have to do because I want to hear these stories. I think when you were talking, Megan, about using target analytics, I think that's an important point to consider. Like, we do have these crazy cool tools, and whatever tool you're using, I mean, we can complain about them all and we can get excited about them all at the same time and in the same conversation. But if we can use and leverage whatever we have. So when I'm looking at giving history, I also like to look at those wealth scores. So I can try to find that opportunity, the mismatch or the match. I'm still keen on how can I find better affinity or better engagement without getting into data science, but I haven't gotten there. My poor little guys, I want to help them. I do. We have another comment. We have approached those with bequest intentions to see if they'd like to begin front loading it for their designation. For example, if their $100,000 endowed plan gift for scholarship will spin off $4,250, our formula, when actualized, would they like to begin putting that to work now and getting the stewardship, i.e. also giving with a warm hand? Yes, again, Russell James research has indicated how beautiful planned giving is, because the brain gets all these wonderful, I'm thinking of my granddaughter, yes, I gave a gift this year. Yes, I got stewarded for that. Yes, I got stewarded for my planned gift. Yes, I heard from that scholarship recipient. The constant excitement. So we're constantly making them feel good about giving. I love that. That's really smart. Those success stories are wonderful. I know more of you have them. Things that you're sharing that you're doing well. I love it if you put it in the chat. I think everyone wants to hear. We're all in different types of organizations and working with different types of constituencies. If we think more about prioritization while we're waiting for people to, oh wait, we have another one. Thoughts on leveraging matching gifts to fill gaps in annual fund or leadership giving goals. Our office has done targeted outreach in the past to folks to remind them they are at a matching gift company. Yes, the matching gifts. That's a beautiful thing. And I'm sure it works when you remind them. Especially there's a lot of software. It makes it super simple for them to complete the form and actually put it in. I think one of the fun things that came out of my early work on the SEC filings was discovering that, and board members also have matching gift as one of their perks. How nice. So that was a good thing. We have approached those with bequest intentions. Oh, wait. I'm already read that. Yes, Ruthie, you agree. It's awesome. And you agree in chat. It's so you. It's great. We are multi-channel today. Awesome.
I was going to say that even though not as many companies do matching gift as did I think when I started, I mean, I still remember when Xerox did a three times match. So if you gave $100, Xerox would match 300. Those things don't happen anymore, but there's still a lot out there. And I think a lot of organizations kind of forgotten, that these are out there. But yes, especially at the end of the year, because all you need to do is just get that matching pledge. If your organization counts pledges, and once you get that matching pledge confirmed, it may take months to get the gift in, but you at least have, the confirmation that you're going to get that gift.
Yeah, 3 times. Wow. That's well, they used to feed lunch. They used to feed employees lunches and all that stuff too. There were a lot of benefits we don't have anymore. Now we just want healthcare, health insurance. So when we think about prioritization generally, like we've talked about some great strategies for end of year, like quick gifts, like how to close on something, especially major gifts. But we had a lot of prioritization kind of questions. I'm wondering if Ruthie, you have any ideas for specifically portfolios. I know I've been working with a group, and they've never had a methodical way of being assigned names, let alone reviewing who they have. And they're so excited that he actually quoted numbers to me. He's like, well, as you showed me, 17% of my file has X, Y, and Z. And if that was 100%, just think how much money I'd bring in. I was like, yes. So I don't know if you have any, inside the portfolio, how can we help them end of year?
I find, and this treads a little over into Greg's realm, but not heavy, that you don't need much more than Excel to do just a little basic analysis to figure out what's going on. Often when I'm doing that, I like to strip out the names. Like I'll just leave the ID numbers because you can still look them up, but it takes away the distraction of being like, oh, Jen, Jen's this and Greg's that. Like it's just, number 12654. So when you take away the distraction of who they are, some of the details about them, you can really see what the data is telling you. And it's easier to prioritize folks based on data than based on who they are sometimes, because we have our favorites. I mean, we as the gift officers, we as an industry, we have our favorite people who we like to meet with. They're tried and true. They're always going to give a gift when you ask for it. And sometimes we need to turn and look at those we haven't been paying as much attention to, because they're going to be the next group coming up behind them, right? Especially the younger folks. I know we hear a lot of folks sort of picking on millennials. I don't think that's fair. As a Gen Xer, I don't categorize a generation, but those folks aren't as young as we folks my age used to think that they were, and they're at a point where we should be looking at these groups in a certain way, like based on age, based on zip code, based on other factors, and saying who within this group is our next, shining star, and who within this group could be doing a little more. But take out the names, just look at the data, see what it tells you. Have they been giving? Have they been coming to events? Have they been renewing a membership for those of you who are membership-based organizations? Find out, taking another look and saying, well, if they're coming to all our events and they're always, renewing their membership, but they haven't yet made a gift, maybe this is someone I need to start looking at, because they're reaching out, they just haven't been asked. So looking at the data without the names. Yeah, and don't discount the octogenarians and older. Absolutely. I used to work for a gentleman who's now nearly 100 years old. He still goes into the office every day. Is a philanthropist. He owns his own, he runs his own foundation. And yeah, don't discount those folks, because they're much more spry than we expect that they would be. And we're going to be those spry people one day, hopefully.
What an amazing tip, Ruthie. Strip the names. That's really smart. I don't think I would have thought of that, because I typically don't have any clue who they are when I work with them. So I kind of don't have that bias, but you're right. Like when you're working directly with a gift officer, talking to them all the time, you've researched the names. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
That's super smart. And I've seen how you and I worked together for a little bit on that test, and how you are taking that analysis to find out what's happening, like an open-ended, what's exploratory, what's happening. And for most of the group here, I'm sure are familiar with CRISP DM approach, just sort of a way of creating a framework or a structure for that data mining. And that really works for prioritization because all of you have different constituencies, cultures, setup, organizations. And once you start to identify what is it I'm really trying to solve for, like, am I prioritizing for that particular person because of whatever reason, then you can identify, well, what is available? Because you mentioned attendance at events. And typically I don't see data like that, but I've been asking for data like email click-throughs because I want to know, like, who are they missing that's really trying to talk to them, but they're not reaching out in the right way, because communication is often an issue. We're also learning with one client that texting works. So he described his strategy of he does the phone call, he's leaving a message, he's emailing, but he's also saying, hey, I'm going to text you. And then of course he said, then he knows if it's a mobile phone number, which we often don't know until we try. And the response rate he was getting was like around 10 to 15%, which he's in mid-level giving, and that we thought that was really quite good. So approaching it from like, what am I trying to solve for? What data is available to me? And then playing without the names. That's prioritizing, right? And sourcing new names. You can do the same with, like, if you weren't in a portfolio, you could do the same with a new data set. And then it all depends on defining what the parameters of your report based on what you're trying to solve for, but also like what you see as the breaks. Like, what are the breaks for your organization in the different variables, like lifetime giving or attendance, or the combination of those things. So now you all know how to do it. Let's just call it a day. I want to squeeze through look back on these and see if we answered everything you guys were asking for.
There was actually an earlier question that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, which is Christine Yeager-Rushton asked, any thoughts on building leadership annual gift lists for the end of the year? And this is actually something I've thought a little bit about too. I used to work for an organization that had leadership annual position. And really, one of the things I go back to is that person who gave, the $1,000 every year. If someone is consistently giving at an annual gift rate, depending on what you consider annual giving, those to me were the sorts of people that I thought could give at annual, the leadership level. But the other were people that honestly we had assigned as major gift level, and we would comb back through contact reports when they were asked for a major gift, and they said, well, we really like what you're doing, but we just can't give at that level right now. And those people would often fall through the cracks. Once they turned down making that major gift, sometimes they were just forgotten about. It was like, well, they can't give a major gift, so we're going to take them off the major gift, the major gift list. And those people could have been very good leadership level givers. They just weren't. Either didn't have the capacity or just weren't ready to give at the major gift level, but that didn't mean they didn't want to give. That just meant they weren't ready for that level yet. So I guess one of the best way to build those lists is just look through what people have said when they've turned down a major gift, and also look through to see, who's giving very consistently at annual giving levels.
Good advice. One of the things that I'm intrigued by, and not sure how to make good use of it at the moment, but those folks, so I often work with organizations who are just putting in process a good prospect ID process, like how do we assign to the portfolios? And often that means that they're calling themselves major gift officers and they're bringing in 100,000, 50,000 cash annual giving. So culturally, they just haven't moved or bridged to that kind of pledge, really larger, not even transformational, but really what most institutionals say major gifts, right? So they are assigned their prospects and they try to make the outreach. And they may or may not be consistent about that outreach either because it's not being tracked. So we don't know. But we have someone, even if they get a hold of them, doesn't want the attention, right? They're giving, they love the organization, just let me give. And that notion that there's or they completely ignore them, but they send a check, so they want the stewardship, but is that the right person for someone who's in a major gift portfolio? I didn't think so. Like, what's that? Like, no, you should be trying to persuade and work intensely with someone over the year to get them to a good fit with your organization. So I am all about like, well, let's reassign them. But we need some kind of code for that, because then when we're prospecting again, they're going to keep popping because they have incredible giving potential, but we're not number one. We're not even number 5 maybe, but we'll take the $5,000 every year. Thank you. So I wonder if I were working on where would I put those people, I might try that annual fund's larger gift, because then you can email them and they might give more, as opposed to trying to develop a relationship or send them information. I'm intrigued. High capacity, relatively low gift. Like, how do you treat them? Is there a different communication tag, or go ahead? Sorry.
No, there's being me. There's an argument to be made also for prospect management for that level. Often we think of doing prospect management at the highest level, and a lot of organizations I've worked for and with are like, oh no, we don't do it anywhere but like the major leadership principal big gifts. However, those sort of larger annual fund gifts, being able to track them, it's a shorter time frame because you're doing it year to year, but you still need to cultivate them and steward them. It's just you do it sort of more like speed dating than the long-term major gift time frame. And there's an argument to be made that you create a prospect management system that works for that, so you don't lose track of them, so that you're like, oh, how do I code them? How do I not lose them in the shuffle? Well, you track them through prospect management, and you just keep managing them within your list, and someone helps you sort of keep reprioritizing your list throughout the year much more rapidly than a major gift portfolio, so that when someone's made the gift, if they're not coming back for a second gift, you just say, wait, off into stewardship, let's work with the rest of them. And you can churn through that list pretty easily, but you need a good system and you need someone who's going to help you manage it pretty well. So there's my prospect management plug.
Yay. I love it. I had a client where there was new leadership, right? Which is how us consultants often get hired. And so there were some people unhappy because they wanted to move to major gifts where you were actually talking to people. And she loved her role because she didn't have to talk to people. She would simply call, send cards. And she said to me, well, they give more. So, I don't worry about it. I just keep doing it. But to your point, for prospect management, it needs to be efficient. They can't pay her a big salary if she's never talking to anyone. Like that doesn't make sense either. And I'm not as familiar with databases. Like I've made a point of that not being my thing. But Salesforce, one of my clients with the mid-level giving program, they've been using the moves object in a different way. So creating pre-populated plans. So the manager creates the plans and he does it using Excel. So it's it's an automated process for him. So he takes the file, he looks at what the ratings are, what he thinks they should ask in the gift, and then he gives it to the data people and they upload it. And so each mid-level officer has pre-populated plans, like automatically tasks are assigned and they know what the goal is for the ask. So you're right, it's just boom, boom, boom. I pick up, I call, I email, and there's all the, the notes, history of what worked in terms of outreach. I was so impressed. I was like, I want to be on that mid-level team. I'll just do the calls. They just show up to work, right? That sounds great. We have some chat. And then we're probably winding up. So if you've got your questions, now is the time. So Ruthie, this is for you. Do you assign them after that? Our executive director doesn't want leadership assignments, which makes staffing difficult.
Yeah. I've worked in both landscapes. Assigning is always better. And you assign your annual fund leadership folk to an annual fund gift officer, not your major leadership principal, whatever you call the higher up, the larger gift asking folks. When you don't do it, it's a little bit more shoot from the hip. Maybe someone gets to them, maybe they don't, because no one's really feeling responsible. And if no one's responsible, then they become the hot potato that everyone keeps chucking around from one to the other. And these are people we're dealing with, which we sometimes forget when, well, if you're a data person like on the back end, these are people we're dealing with. They know when they're being treated like a hot potato. They know when like 12 different people have called them or reached out to them. They're looking for connection. They want to be donor centric. So assigning them is better if you can talk those up the org chart into that model. And if not, it can be done, but it's a lot more challenging.
So when we talk about assignments, I wonder if there isn't a little wiggle room on defining. So I have an organization that's very resistant to the higher education model, and they're raising, lots of money, but they don't want to assign prospects. And that blows my mind. Like, how will anyone know what's happening? Now, they're a small team, so they haven't scaled and they've been doing well. So what they're doing is they do create a move. I think they're in Salesforce too. And so if I'm the gift officer and I've had contact with someone and I'm working with them, I do have a move that's assigned to me, but I'm not the person assigned to the donor, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit of like, no one has assignments, but they do. So if you paired that with the mid-level giving example where you could assign the move with the pre-populated plans, you could scale up without saying that you're assigning. Is that terrible? I wonder if that's a way to be efficient without, or assign it to a role instead of a person. There's got to be ways to help the executive director feel like you're not being rigid or restrictive and yet still accomplish efficiency. It's politics. So we heard from Haley, and she said they're establishing the criteria of being targeted for special attention, usually for upgrade, even if it is an annual fund gift, in order to go into the prospect management system. That makes sense. Our annual fund has become more restricted over the years, so we have lots of buckets: annual fund, scholarships, annual fund internships, and stewardship for them very strongly based on those buckets. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a double-edged sword. Unrestricted, that's restricted. But I can see why donors would like that. What about assigning a group to a time frame? Take specific action on the folks during Q3, for instance. It's an option. That's a nice way to wiggle around the language of assigning a prospect to a person. I think that's a great idea. Because usually it's just people get stuck on language. And if we can start to talk their language instead of our language, a lot of times they want the same thing. Yes. Yes. Has anyone else done that? Good question. Follow-up question, Greg. Love it. So we have about 5 minutes to wrap it up. Tammy's wondering if in Razor's Edge you can use the proposals, or telling us you can use the proposals opportunities to do this. Very nice. Yeah. It's amazing how important it is to know how to use a database. And I've been definitely partnering with folks who know how to do that well. Because if you don't have it set up correctly, it doesn't work. Wow, Elizabeth, that's amazing. She volunteers for the stewardship committee for her church. We meet with 1/3 of the congregation in person each year. That's really awesome. It's that human element that makes such a big difference. And when I hear from folks about the human element, it's different for different, like the stories are all different. Like the one guy was like, yeah, we bonded over sports. So he developed a rapport, and he talks to the guy about sports, and he talks about him like he's his friend. Whereas someone else is talking about, well, listening for their interests and then following up with that. So there are many different ways to do it, depending on the style and personality of the gift officer. Asking about whether the chat is going to be made available. I don't know, but I do know it used to be, and it is. If you look at the bottom of your chat, you're going to see the ellipses, the 3 dots on the bottom left. And if you click on it, one of the options is to save the chat. So you can do that now. And we can certainly hang out for a few minutes after we turn off the recording and stuff so that you can get the chat. I have done this myself where I want to save the chat, forget that I'm not the one running the session, and I lose it. I asked somebody for their email. Like, I should have just done a screenshot, something. Well, thank you guys for participating. Thank you, Greg and Ruthie, for letting me ask you questions and all that stuff. I love the conversation. I just think we get so much out of everything. There's so much in this room today, so much expertise, experience, all that stuff. So thank you guys for joining.
Yes, and thanks to everyone for attending, and thank you again, Jen, for volunteering to be a part of our water cooler chat. As I said, it's unfortunate that Marianne couldn't join us today, but I'm sure we'll be able to have a chance that you can come back and you can debate some topic. I mean, one of our future water cooler chats is going to be Marianne and I arguing over whether Excel can be used exclusively for data analysis. So we're gonna try to debate water cooler chat one of these days. So
do we know the topic of the next water cooler chat? That's a tough question. Okay, but we know it's right on the website. All you have to do is look at the top menu, right? And I think one of the drop downs is going to show you the water cooler chat. You can click on it and you can register. Of course, you all did that, so you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Thank you again, Jen, and thank you again, everyone, for attending. I hope we all have a great day. And we're reaching 10 o'clock Pacific. I don't know how many of you are out all the way out on the West Coast, but and 1 o'clock Eastern. So I think it's about time to wrap up. So thank you all very much.